Have you ever stopped to think that the person you see as the most confident or powerful might actually be hiding a storm of insecurities? It sounds paradoxical, but that is exactly what happens with Kat Hernandez in Euphoria. She built a version of herself that shines, that draws attention, that seems to dominate the world. But what if I told you that every like, every compliment, every bold step is also a form of escape? What if her real battle was not out there, but inside herself, in silence? Today, we are going to dive into this complex universe, uncover the defense mechanisms, the fears no one sees, and understand how these layers shape everything she feels and does. Get ready to look beyond the persona and realize that, many times, what looks like power is only the tip of an emotional iceberg. If you are a fan of cinema and psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But before that, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now let us go to the video. Who is the character? Kat was always that girl who almost went unnoticed in the hallways. You know, not because she lacked color, but because the world seemed to have decided she worked better in silent mode. She grew up observing more than speaking, kind of hiding behind texts, fanfics, and daydreams that gave more excitement than her own routine. The feeling of being invisible became company, the kind no one chooses but insists on staying. And for a long time, she believed that was the most she could ever be. But behind the reserved attitude, there was always a noisy mind, the kind that keeps building parallel stories just to make the day bearable. You know, when we fantasize about being someone completely different because real life feels too small, that was how Kat lived. No one noticed that while she laughed at other people's jokes. Inside, she was trying to figure out exactly where she fit or if she fit at all. In childhood, she learned early that her body would become a topic even when she did not want it to be. Those sideways looks from people, the comments that started subtle and turned into stings, shape any teenager. With Kat, it shaped her in silence. She swallowed everything, the words, the looks, the comparisons, until it turned into a thick layer of self-accusation that no one could see. The most curious thing is that despite this inner harshness, she always had a creative side bubbling inside her, as if part of her was begging to be more than the label the world stuck on her. She wrote, imagined, planned, better versions of herself. But whenever she tried to bring those versions into real life, she seemed to freeze. It is like trying to run while wearing shoes 2 sizes smaller. You know where you want to go, but it hurts too much to walk. Then comes the decisive moment when she realizes that to survive in the chaotic universe of Euphoria, she will need armor. Not medieval armor, of course, but emotional armor, the kind that shines on the outside and is completely patched on the inside. That is when Kat started experimenting with versions of herself that seemed more powerful, more bold, more untouchable. But power is seductive and dangerous when it is born from pain. That change did not happen overnight. It is almost like when someone gets used to cutting their own hair every week just to see if they can find a version that finally feels right. Kat saw every small transformation, visual, emotional, virtual, as a chance to leave her old version behind. The version that suffered quietly, accepted crumbs, and tried to occupy as little space as possible. But like every well-built character, Kat is not made of just one dramatic turning point. She is a mosaic of old insecurities, hidden dreams, the desire to be seen, and the fear of what will happen when she finally is. Does that sound exaggerated? Maybe. But who has never felt divided between who they really are and who they wish they could be? She simply lives this in a more explosive and digital way, and it is exactly in this contrast between the girl who used to hide and the persona that is born that her journey becomes truly interesting. Because while she tries to discover who she is behind the masks, something even deeper appears, the question of which version of herself is safe enough to exist in the real world. And when that thread starts being pulled, the first internal conflict begins to reveal itself deep inside, almost calling her by name. From a very early age, Kat learned that the mirror was not a friend, it was almost a judge. Every detail of her body seemed to be examined with emotional magnification, and like many people, she tried to pretend she did not care. But deep down, every comment, every laugh a little too close, every silent comparison created cracks that were hard to hide. It is the kind of thing people try to ignore, but it keeps echoing in the back of their mind. And that echo shaped a large part of who she believed she needed to be. Meanwhile, behind layers of clothes and sharp humor, there was someone desperately trying to find a safe place inside her own skin. Kat began to understand that if she could not love what she saw, at least she could control what she showed. There is a logic in that which many people use without realizing it. If they do not like me this way, I will show them who I think they want to see. But strategies like that charge a very expensive emotional price later. Creating a persona for her was not a conscious choice, it was a form of survival. Like when someone creates a character in a game because real life feels too difficult to play. This version of her, more daring, more confident, more in control, seemed to solve everything for a few minutes. But the truth is, it was only emotional makeup, beautiful, shiny, but incapable of holding the storm when the heart tightened. And the most curious thing is that this transformation did not come from nowhere. Kat realized that when she acted like this more powerful version, people finally paid attention. It was as if she had discovered a secret code: exaggerate, shock, dominate, and maybe no one will notice how much it hurts inside. And that feeling of instant control is an addiction that is hard to let go of, especially when the world has always treated you as if you were too small. But the more this persona grew, the more the real Kat seemed to shrink. She began to confuse who she wanted to be with, who she needed to appear to be, and that happens with frightening ease. We try so hard to fit in that, when we realize it, we are trapped in an emotional outfit that was never tailored for us, and every time she wore that artificial confidence, the insecure version inside her became even more isolated. This conflict created a daily tension. She liked the power the persona gave her, but also carried intense guilt for moving away from who she really was. It is like that moment when you tell a small lie just to impress someone, and before you know it, you have invented an entire life. She wanted to be seen, but was afraid that if she showed her true self, people would ignore her again. So she kept the show going even when it drained her strength. Deep down, Kat lived a silent war between performed confidence and real insecurity. And this war is more common than it seems. Everyone at some point creates a better version of themselves to face the world. The problem is that when this version starts replacing who you really are, it becomes an emotional labyrinth that is difficult to escape. She walked through that labyrinth trying to appear stronger while carrying a fragility that no one could see. And it is exactly in this confusion between identities that the next conflict begins to grow, because when her persona meets the internet and discovers the power of validation, the tension increases, and what that awakens inside her opens a much deeper chapter. When Kat discovered the universe of online validation, it was like opening a secret door to a place where she was finally seen. And not just seen, she was desired, celebrated, admired. Every like felt like a hug she had never received. And every message was a reminder that maybe she was worth more than she believed. But behind that pleasant feeling, there was a silent danger. She began to depend on it, like someone depending on a daily dose of borrowed courage. The internet became the stage where Kat could be everything she had always been afraid to be in real life. And that contrast is extremely seductive. After all, when you spend years being ignored, any crumb of attention feels like a feast. But in her case, they were not crumbs. They were complete showers of validation. And as anyone who has ever gotten lost in their own likes knows, it becomes addictive. The feeling is almost immediate. The heart races, the chest opens, and that bitter insecurity falls asleep for a few minutes. The problem is that online validation is never stable. One day you receive a flood of compliments, and the next day silence hurts like rejection. Kat began to measure her value through those ups and downs, as if it were an emotional stock market. And when self-esteem depends on the mood of the internet, any fluctuation turns into an internal storm. She smiled when notifications popped up and wilted when the screen stayed too quiet. And the worst part, she knew that her online version was not completely real. It was built, calculated, designed to be desired. But even knowing that she preferred this created version rather than facing the discomfort of being herself, it is like falling in love with your own filter. You know it is not entirely you, but you also believe it is the only acceptable way to exist. And that hurts in a way that no one sees. This dependence started turning into emotional anesthesia. Whenever the real world felt too heavy, she ran to the virtual one, where approval arrived faster than a negative thought. But anesthesia does not cure pain, it only hides it. And without realizing it, Kat allowed each online compliment to hold together the internal cracks that needed real attention. It was easier to escape than to feel, and anyone who has never escaped a little can throw the first Wi-Fi. Over time, she started noticing that her confident version only existed when there were eyes watching. When she was alone, the mask fell, and the insecurity returned stronger, almost as if it were charging interest for the escape. This emotional rise and fall cycle created a kind of silent dependency, as if she needed other people's gaze to remember that she existed. And that is exhausting emotionally, mentally, and even physically. Online validation became the thermometer of her value, and that started affecting how she related to people outside the screens, because the more we depend on external approval, the less we believe in our own. She began doubting real compliments, genuine affection, anything that did not come wrapped in emojis and flashy comments. Deep down, she no longer knew how to differentiate who liked her from who liked the character. And it is exactly this confusion between what is real and what is performance that prepares the ground for the next conflict. Because when someone offers Kat affection that does not depend on masks or fantasies, something inside her breaks or awakens. When true affection finally appears in the life of someone who has spent years hiding behind a persona, it is almost like receiving a compliment in a language you do not yet speak. Kat did not really know what to do with it. The affection coming from the real world felt strange, almost uncomfortable, as if it had been delivered to the wrong house. She wanted to believe she deserved it, but there was a part of her whispering, "This is not for you." The problem with living on the defensive for too long is that we start associating vulnerability with danger. Kat learned to protect herself so well with irony, attitude, personas, and internal walls that when someone tried to come in, she froze. And it was not because she did not want it, it was fear. Fear of being seen completely with all the insecurities, scars, and fragilities that the screens never showed. Receiving affection meant lowering her guard, and that felt too expensive. It is curious how human beings can prefer familiar suffering to unfamiliar affection. With Kat, this became clear whenever someone treated her with genuine kindness. Instead of feeling comfortable, she shrank emotionally, as if something were wrong. It is like when someone hugs you tightly, and instead of relaxing, you hold your breath because you do not know how to deal with it. She wanted closeness, but did not know how to receive it without suspicion. And that suspicion did not come from nowhere. After years of believing she was not worthy of love, every gesture of affection seemed suspicious. Kat kept trying to figure out what the person really wanted, as if affection were a hidden trap. And this emotional paranoia is more common than it seems. When self-esteem is fragile, affection becomes a gift we examine too much, turning it over again and again, looking for a flaw that confirms the fear that has always been there. The truth is that loving requires a courage that her persona did not have. The persona knew how to appear powerful, desirable, untouchable, but it did not know how to receive care. It did not know how to deal with comfortable silence, with touch without second intentions, with the calm of someone who simply wanted to be there, and that made her anxious. Because when affection is real, it forces you to exist as you are, not as you perform. Every time someone tried to approach her, sincerely, Kat felt as if the ground became more slippery. Part of her wanted to move forward, and another part wanted to run. This conflict between desire and fear kept her in a constant state of alert. She tried to appear uninterested or too busy, but it was only an attempt to control what she did not know how to control, being loved without pretending to be strong. Deep down, she carried a feeling of inadequacy that made any display of affection seem exaggerated for her, as if she were receiving something she did not deserve. And that created enormous emotional tension because she wanted to experience love, but did not know if she could sustain it without falling apart completely. Accepting real affection meant letting the mask fall, and she was not sure if what existed underneath was enough. And it is exactly at this point that another conflict begins to emerge, almost like a shadow behind her. Because to escape this emotional discomfort, Kat does what she has always done. She escapes into a world she can control, the world of fantasies. And that is where her story becomes even deeper. Kat has always lived surrounded by fantasies, not only in the romantic sense, but as a true tool of emotional survival. When real life felt too small or too painful, she ran into her own mind, like someone escaping into a secret room. There she could control everything: who she was, how she was seen, what she deserved. Fantasy became a place where the world finally made sense, or at least seemed not to hurt so much. The most curious thing is that for her, imagining stories was not just a hobby, it was almost a way of breathing. That was where she found versions of herself that were never allowed to exist outside. In those stories, she was desired, powerful, admired, everything she had always wanted to be. And who has never hidden in a parallel universe to escape a reality that feels like it is squeezing your shoulders? Kat simply took that to a much deeper level. Over time, fantasy became a kind of emotional anesthesia, like a cushion she placed between herself and the real world. When life became heavy, she threw herself into those idealized versions of her own existence because nothing escaped her control. In those stories, no one rejected, judged, or diminished her. And as comfortable as that was, it created an ever-growing gap between what she lived and what she wished to feel. Fantasy also served as a place where she could experiment with emotions that in real life seemed too dangerous. Love, courage, sensuality, power, everything flowed easily. But when she left that universe, she returned to being the insecure Kat who did not know how to deal with her own body or with other people's gaze. It is like watching a movie every day where you are the protagonist and then realizing that in real life you entered as an extra. This dependence on the imagined world began to interfere with her relationships, because the more intense the fantasy became, the more frustrating real contact with people felt. No affection seemed to live up to what she experienced inside her own mind. No interest seemed big enough. And that is cruel because reality can never compete with a script written perfectly to satisfy you. And that is where another detail appears. Fantasy gave her a false sense of safety. It seems paradoxical, but the more she hid in those idealized worlds, the more afraid she felt of truly living. After all, in imagination, there is no rejection, there is no comparison, there is no risk. But living is risky, vulnerable, imperfect by definition. And for someone who spent her life running from her own imperfection, diving into reality felt terrifying. Because of this, she began to use fantasy as a filter. Nothing entered without passing through an exaggerated expectation or a silent comparison. And this created enormous tension between what she wanted and what she allowed herself to live. It is like wanting a cinematic love, but only allowing relationships where you can control everything. This emotional distance became a wall, one that was difficult to climb, even for those who truly wanted to reach her heart. And it is precisely in this contrast between the idealized world and the real world that another even greater fear is born, the fear of being truly seen. Because the more perfect the fantasy becomes, the more frightening the idea of someone knowing the real version, imperfect, insecure, human. And it is exactly this fear that opens the door to the next conflict. Being truly seen has always been one of Kat's greatest anxieties, not out of vanity, but because she spent years believing that the real version of herself would never be enough. When someone looked at her too closely, she felt as if every insecurity was written on her face, even when no one was actually noticing anything. This discomfort came from within, from that voice repeating insistently that her vulnerability was too ugly to be shown. And it is difficult to silence a voice that has echoed for so long. This fear made her create emotional strategies so that no one could get too close. She used humor, attitude, even provocation when necessary, everything to maintain a safe distance, because in her mind, being seen was the first step toward being rejected. It was as if she had learned that love only worked when it came filtered, never directly, and this dynamic becomes a habit long before we realize we are sabotaging ourselves. Kat also felt divided between two opposite desires: to be seen and to be hidden. She wanted attention. Yes, she wanted to be desired, recognized, validated, but at the same time, she felt panic at the possibility that someone might see the parts she tried so hard to bury. It is that cruel paradox of someone who desires connection but fears exposure. Almost an internal game of see me but do not see me too much. This fear became even more intense in closer relationships. Because the closer someone came, the harder it became to maintain the persona. The masks start to slip. And Kat felt that when that happened, everything about her was at risk, as if any flaw would be enough for the person to leave. Anyone who has felt this knows it is not about trusting the other person, it is about not trusting yourself enough to believe you deserve to be loved. When someone tried to understand her more vulnerable side, Kat would dodge the conversation, change the subject, sometimes even create a small chaos to divert attention. It was a form of protection, of course, but also a form of control, because if she chose what people could see, she could avoid them seeing what she feared the most. But this kind of control creates an invisible emotional prison, and a suffocating one. This deep fear also came from the fact that in her mind, the real version would always be compared to the fantasy she herself created, and she believed she would fail that test. After all, no one can compete with their own imagination, and Kat knew that. So, instead of risking being imperfect in the real world, she preferred to keep enough distance so she would not disappoint anyone. The problem is that this also pushed away those who truly wanted to know her. Over time, this fear of exposure began to erode the way she saw herself. She started to believe that she only deserved relationships where she could control everything from the image to the intensity of what she felt. And when you control too much, you feel too little. That is how life begins to lose color, even when everything on the outside seems vibrant. The armor that protects also weighs down, and Kat had been carrying it for far too long. And it is precisely from this fear of being seen that another deep effect is born in her life, the way these insecurities shape her romantic and social choices. Because when someone lives afraid of their own vulnerability, every connection begins to be filtered by insecurity, and that opens the door to the next major conflict. Throughout her adolescence, Kat shaped her relationships like someone sculpting a piece that needs to survive. Every choice, every approach seemed to pass through an invisible filter, separating what was safe from what could hurt. This made her careful, sometimes too careful, choosing who she would allow to come close and who would remain at a distance. And this process was not conscious at every moment, but it functioned like an emotional compass, not always reliable, but necessary for protection. What weighs the most is that because of these filters, Kat ended up building relationships where she could control the narrative. Friendships, romances, even casual interactions passed through the test of emotional safety. She constantly tested loyalty, patience, and tolerance because she still did not know if she could trust herself. And it is incredible how we repeat these patterns without realizing it. The emotional past becomes a silent guide to the present, even when it is painful. When it comes to romantic affection, this defense becomes even more visible. Kat seeks intensity, but at the same time keeps distance. It is that classic dynamic of approaching and retreating, loving from afar, so she will not get hurt up close. She desires real connection, but needs to feel that the other person accepts not only the confident persona, but also the vulnerable Kat, and that rarely comes without tests, drama, and internal insecurity rising like a warning. And this does not only affect who she chooses to love, but how she relates to everyone around her. Every social interaction becomes a complex board of strategies: when to approach, when to distance herself, when to pretend she does not care. This constant caution consumes energy, but also works as a shield. It is as if every move were calculated to minimize the risk of rejection and maximize the feeling of control over her own life. Kat also realizes that these choices are not only about protection but about self-perception. The more she manipulates her relationships, the more she distances herself from what she truly feels. It is an intense contradiction. To feel safe, she sacrifices moments of authenticity. And who has never felt like that, balancing the desire for connection with the fear of getting hurt? She simply lives this on a more intense scale and often in a more visible way. On the other hand, these choices also create moments of personal power. She learns to set boundaries, to protect her emotional space, to not be carried away by external pressure. And that is something admirable if we look at it through the right lens. But of course, there is always the other side when protection becomes a barrier. The risk is losing opportunities for genuine experiences that could transform her life. The consequence is that Kat becomes an emotional strategist without realizing it. Every friendship, every flirt, every social decision is calculated to balance desire and fear, intensity and safety. She learns to read signals, interpret emotions, anticipate reactions, but the price is the constant feeling that she can never fully lower her guard. It is a delicate dance, intense and often lonely. And it is in this scenario that the final narrative loop begins to take shape. How all this construction of defenses and fantasies prepares Kat for the closing of the story, where all the internal and external tensions meet and connect with her future journey. That is where the next chapter of her life begins to breathe. In the end, Kat is a mosaic of insecurities, dreams, and strategies of emotional survival. Every choice, every persona, every escape into the imagined world built a version of her that is strong, bold, and at the same time fragile. This mixture creates a constant tension between what she is and what she shows, between what she desires and what she fears. It is a delicate dance that no one else sees, but that defines every step of her life. This tension is like an invisible thread connecting all the previous conflicts. The insecurity about her image, the dependence on validation, the fear of real affection, and the escape into fantasy intertwine so that every social or romantic decision carries the weight of those internal echoes. It feels almost cinematic because you can sense in every look or gesture that a much bigger story is happening beneath the surface. And it is exactly this thread that creates a continuous loop in Kat's life. Every action leads to an internal reaction, which leads to another choice, which reopens old wounds and activates old fears. It is not necessarily a bad cycle, but it is intense and complicated, and it defines the way she navigates the world. We realize that this is not just teenage behavior, but a sophisticated and deep attempt at emotional survival. The curious thing is that within this loop, there is always an opportunity for transformation. Every conflict, no matter how painful, offers clues about who Kat really is and what she needs to face. But these clues are subtle and often mixed with fantasies and defenses. Someone observing from the outside might not notice, but inside her, every small emotional victory or failure creates space for the next choice, for the next test of courage. It is as if every experience were a mirror reflecting not only who she is, but also who she fears becoming. And every reflection generates a silent question: can I be loved as I truly am? This question is both uncomfortable and necessary, because without it, Kat would not move forward. She needs this discomfort, even if she does not admit it, in order to continue her journey of self-discovery. And it is at this point that the narrative reaches its highest tension. Kat stands between two forces. On one side, the persona built to protect herself; on the other, the vulnerability that longs to be recognized and accepted. This internal battle creates rich and deep scenes, the kind that stay with the viewer because it is easy to identify with the fear, the courage, and the complexity of feeling so much while showing so little. This final loop is also a bridge to what comes next. Every step, every hesitation, every escape or approach prepares the ground for the conflicts that will arise. And we realize that Kat's story does not end here, but continues unfolding always between what is real and what is fantasy, between what she wants to show and what she fears revealing, and it is exactly this sense of continuity that leaves the viewer curious, waiting to discover how Kat will deal with all of this, which masks she will choose, which fantasies she will challenge, and above all, whether she will one day allow herself to truly be seen. It is a silent invitation to dive into the next phase of the story. So what did you think about diving into the mind of Kat Hernandez? Did you manage to identify with any of her conflicts, or notice something new about how we deal with insecurity, validation, and vulnerability? I want to know in the comments which character you want me to analyze in the next video, because every story has something to teach. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you can continue following all the psychological analyses and better understand what happens behind the personalities that fascinate us. Every click and every comment helps us create more deep, fun, and reflective content. Shall we keep unraveling these stories together?